The climate change crisis has taken the world by storm. Environmental learning has helped to raise awareness about the ecological and social implications of this crisis. In many cases, this awareness has led to action, and individuals, schools, workplaces, and governments are all rising to the challenge. Here at home, the provincial government announced a commitment to leading the world in sustainable schools, with environmentally responsible building codes in mind and the BC Green Schools program, among other outreach initiatives. Educators are making a commitment to action through environmental education research and K-12 initiatives that aim to increase students' appreciation for the environment. On today's program, Dr. David Zandvliet, Associate Professor of Education at Simon Fraser University, and Vanessa Lee, Park Interpretation Leader for Metro Vancouver Regional Parks, join us to discuss the latest developments, challenges, and opportunities in environmental learning. I'm Paul Shaker, and this is An Education Matter. David, environmental learning is not a new field. It's been around for 30 years or more, but it seems to be gaining momentum and changing in its character. Could you take us back historically and bring us up to date on how the field has evolved during your career and mine?
Yes, well, it's been around for 30 or 40 years. We've had a program at SFU, and we'll be celebrating 40 years coming next year. I'm a product of the earlier age of environmental education, and I think part of the reason we're getting momentum in the field now is that the first generation of environmentally educated people are in leadership roles now, and their values are being imbued in the programs that are going forward. The other reason is that a lot of the environmental problems or issues that we talk about are becoming more visible, things like climate change, water shortages, etc. So we're not dealing with theoretical issues anymore, we're dealing with real problems that are out there in society.
I think the way that environmental learning is delivered has also evolved from my understanding of your work. The actual instructional methodologies and the feel of coursework in environmental learning. Could you help us with an understanding of this aspect?
Sure. Last year, the ministry published a document called Environmental Learning and Experience, and one of the key principles is direct experience as a teaching principle. So in early days, I think education was more about indoctrination, sort of packaged solutions about what we should be doing. But these days, we're focused more on inquiry, problem-based solutions, getting kids out to see real-world problems, and giving them some flexibility to design their approach to think about some problems rather than having these packaged answers for them, which may or may not be correct.
And that brings us to Vanessa's work. You're also a student in our graduate program at SFU in environmental learning. But tell us about your day job and how it contributes to this direct understanding of environmental issues.
Well, what I'm hoping to do with the people in the Lower Mainland is to get them out for that direct experience so that they can appreciate the aesthetic values, but also learn the inherent values of having a clean forest with clean water. So just getting them the direct experience and appreciation, and hopefully they will come to value it and want to protect it.
So there's an aesthetic dimension as well as a practical dimension. There's an economic side to these issues as well as an ethical side. David, you were talking about some of the key concepts that undergird the environmental learning curriculum. Could you review those for us?
Sure. We use a mnemonic of CARE in this environmental learning and experience document, and CARE is sort of the big picture. We want people to care, but it's also an acronym for 4 other themes: complexity, aesthetics, responsibility, and ethics. And complexity underlies sort of the systems approach to thinking about the environment, and that systems approach is sort of complex ecological systems as well as social systems and how those interact. The aesthetic, speaks to people's awareness and their emotional engagement with the environment. Even when you talk to scientists, often their way into teaching and learning about the environment was an aesthetic appreciation and an emotional connection to a particular place, let's say a park. The R The R is responsibility, and that's where action and advocacy around the environment take place. And then finally, that development of an environmental ethic as being the key goal, where it imbues your values and it's the way you live your life.
I'm impressed at the way the design of environmental learning is really state-of-the-art in terms of any curriculum and instruction. I suppose to some degree it's because it's a relatively new entrant into the curriculum and you have the opportunity to do things with all current knowledge in place. One of the things you talked about in other venues was the nature of infusing something into the curriculum as opposed to having a discrete course for it. Would you talk about the relative merits of having a course for environmental learning as opposed to infusing environmental learning across the curriculum?
Right. Yes. Well, in BC, we've adopted this infusion model quite deliberately, and all of the curriculum frameworks and approaches look at environmental learning as being embedded across all the subjects and disciplines K to 12. We actually have curricular maps that show how these 4 themes of complexity, aesthetics, and responsibility and ethics can be found in learning outcomes in the sciences, in the social studies, in arts, in language arts. And the notion is that all education could be environmental education. Now, this is in contrast with other jurisdictions which have created sometimes environmental science curricula, and those tend to be more monodisciplinary, like so you could have an environmental science program. You might look at complexity, but you may not get to values and ethics and so on in that kind of curriculum. Also, politically, it's suspect because in times of cutbacks and so on, for example, the Harris government in Ontario removed the environmental science curriculum completely out of the Ontario curriculum, and they could do that because it was a discrete outlier and not mandated curriculum in terms of core. So there are people that argue for either approach, but in BC we've had a lot of success using the infusion approach, and it's working, I think.
People seem to be taking the whole subject area more seriously now, Vanessa. When you're leading these tours and talking with people of all ages and all walks of life, do you get the sense that there's more of a feeling of urgency about the environment and that they want to see a greater awareness in schools and in other venues in society?
Definitely, demand for our programs is high, and also you can see with the kids coming out and the types of questions that they ask, they're much more aware than, say, even just 10, 20 years ago. And so it's really heartening to see that people are caring and want to find solutions and want to work together.
That's certainly a big foundation in getting something to be carried through in the curriculum. David, you were talking about the enthusiasm of teachers about this topic. Tell us how you have experienced that enthusiasm.
Well, our programs are very popular. I think it's part because we try to model this experiential approach to teaching and learning. So, for example, our institutes in environmental ed, they don't occur on the university campus at all. They happen in the field. They happen in parks where Vanessa works. They happen at the sewage treatment plant, for example, where people get a real-world kind of concrete view of what's been going on. We actually do one field trip, which I call the 3 smellies. And people almost need counseling at the end of the day. They go to the wastewater treatment plant, they go to the Kent Street waste transfer station, and they go to the Burnaby incinerator, all in one day. And there's a big difference between reading about solid waste problems in the Lower Mainland and actually seeing what's going on in those facilities. People are changed when they see that, and that's very different than book learning. That models what we mean when we say direct experience rather than book experience.
Well, we've had a couple of dramatic warnings recently in the province. One was the turgidity of water that we experienced a couple years ago, and another is the ongoing battle with the pine beetle. I suppose these are things that people raise when you're taking them on tours, Vanessa. What do you tell them about issues such as this?
It's something that if they engage themselves and learn more about the topic themselves, they'll be able to find solutions. But it's also working together and being out in the field and trying to figure out what's going on.
The impact of environmental learning may be too soon to tell, but are you seeing some evidence that we're having an impact by raising awareness in schools and in society through ongoing conversations and changes in the curriculum?
Well, I think if you speak with children, school children, they have a burning desire to be involved with these environmental issues. And whenever I've done research in the classroom, we just did a video project for the Ministry of Education last year, and part of that project was actually sitting down with a focus group of elementary kids right after they'd done a salmon release and talking to them about what the experience was like and what they would learn. And when people see those videos, actually when I see those videos again, I'm just totally moved by what they articulate and what they can say about the environment and how meaningful those kinds of direct experiences are for them. And it's one of those things that they're not getting in their family situations like you and I might have gotten when we were children. For the most part, living in urban centers, kids do not get these outdoor experiences through their family necessarily. So if we're not doing it as part of the public school system, often this is just not going to happen. It's how you build connection with environment.
I suppose you see some of that, Vanessa, in the naivete of city kids about the environment.
Oh, definitely. A lot of them will come out and expect there to be bears and cougars waiting just around the corner, or else they're afraid to get their hands dirty. And so it's kind of up to us to break down those barriers between them and nature and get them directly experiencing, looking for insects, hugging a tree, and getting those feelings and emotional connections to the place that they live in.
You talked too, Vanessa, about the practical or economic aspect of good environmental practices. What are some of the illustrations that you give people as you take them on these tours of the economic impact of our behavior toward the environment?
Well, Capilano River Regional Park is a great example of just a watershed and our impacts of that we need drinking water, clean drinking water, and also having to dam an area for that. And so what happens to the creatures and the habitat below that dam? And if it's a stream-bearing river, then there are definitely effects on the local ecology of the whole area, not just the animals, but people also eat salmon as well. And so how does that affect everything? So it's good to get students just thinking about that, and they can come up with their own solutions together.
Thank you very much. We'll be back in a moment.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
Our topic today is environmental learning. David and Vanessa, I know that you've been traveling around the Pacific Rim as a part of our master's programs, our field programs, and so on, our field schools. And so I think it would be interesting for all of us to hear a little bit about what environmental learning looks like in Australia, for example, where you earned your doctorate.
Sure. Actually, we went last August with my master's cohort to Western Australia, which is quite a large, diverse region, and in a lot of ways similar to British Columbia and Western Canada, politically and demographically. However, environmental education is quite advanced in Australia. A lot of the research is coming out of there, and it's quite a core part of the school curriculum. And I think there's some interesting reasons that I might surmise to why that is. One, a lot of the environmental problems we're talking about here in Canada, theoretically, like water shortages, they've had to deal with for a much longer time in Australia. They're diverting huge amounts of water around that state to service Perth, for example. And so when you look at the facilities in Perth in terms of what they do with water, it's quite dramatically different than here. They have one of the lowest per capita usages of water in the world. I believe in Vancouver we're about at the top in terms of per capita consumption. But I think the other reason why Australia maybe is dealing with environmental education in more robust ways than here is that they've had some historically major conservation issues with different species that have gone extinct. You know, the rabbit fence in Western Australia and so on. So I'm wondering if that's sending us a message that, do things have to get that bad before we take environmental education more seriously here? Part of me is saying that might be the case, but I'm hoping with a lot of advocacy, maybe we'll get ahead of the game here.
Well, the evidence is there now. If we look around, I think, as we see with the pine beetle, it probably is under our nose, but we can choose to explain it away or ignore it. Vanessa, you were talking with me earlier about your experiences in Indonesia. You went to a field school in Indonesia as a part of your studies. Could you tell us some of the environmental issues that you saw there?
Sure. Indonesia, where the part we went to was northern Sulawesi and Manado in particular, and it's a hot spot for marine biodiversity, and there's coral reefs beyond imaginable belief there. They're just gorgeous and full of life. And so, of course, that attracts a lot of divers and a lot of tourism. And there's plus and bonuses. You know, you've got the economic bonuses for the people there, but then you also have the environmental degradation that comes along with it. You get plastic bottles, you get garbage that's not biodegradable, and the locals there are used to biodegradable substances and so don't really know what to do with all this extra trash. So that's one thing, and the other is just etiquette around coral reefs and, you know, taking care when you're actually out in the environment to get your direct experience. And yeah, there's a few issues there that we're hoping to help out with.
Good. Now, David, what do you see as the challenges or resistance to environmental learning? For many people, it seems obvious that we'd want to move in this direction, but things don't just move that way in public life. What are the locuses of resistance that keep environmental learning from progressing as it might?
Right. Well, one, I think, is seeing the global picture. In the story that Vanessa was just telling, I can imagine a lot of people would be thinking, oh, well, what has this got to do with Canada? Or what have we, you know, what can Canadians do to help a problem in Indonesia? I read a paper last week about acidification of the oceans, for example, which has been linked to coral bleaching and, you know, various other kinds of disruptions in marine ecosystems, that it is a direct result of carbon emissions here in the Western world, and in particular in North America, which has the highest carbon emissions. So there's a direct link globally between things that we do here and issues that occur in the third world that are sometimes hidden, and environmental learning and environmental education can help make people aware of those connections. But the other resistance, I think, is just the status quo in the corporate world. Sometimes it's just easier to carry on business the way it's always been done. And there's a lot of greenwash going on currently. You know, a lot of people that are sort of taking the green mantra and trying to use it to market their products without actually having an environmental ethic or values in behind it. So again, that's a whole other area of media awareness where environmental education could help uncover some of this greenwash and have people be a little bit more critical consumers.
When you work with the curriculum, do you get into issues of the government's role and whether the government's necessary to come in and affect the status quo, as you mentioned, so that a company that tries to sincerely participate in green programs isn't penalized by the marketplace?
I don't see with the current market conditions. I think that most people are wanting green products right now. It's become, you know, when we were talking about the momentum in the field, I think we've reached a tipping point where the environmental ethic is becoming a mainstream value. And I think there's a lag in the corporate world and in a lot of governments even where, you know, I might say certain jurisdictions are marketing themselves as being environmentally responsible without actually having the ethic in behind. But they're doing that because that's what the public is saying that they want. It's a #1 election issue, I think. And governments and corporations are dealing with it in very mixed ways. Some are taking it on in real ways, and others are doing what I call greenwash, covering themselves with this green mantra without any kind of green core behind it.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's a conflict between short-term and long-term payoff in some cases. I suppose you look at survey data of attitudes around the world. How does BC stack up as a political entity in its attitudes toward the green movement?
Well, my understanding is that we're a fairly green province. I mean, Greenpeace got its start in Vancouver. We're kind of unique in Canada in terms of the environmental ethic. Doesn't mean that we always behave in green ways, but it's certainly on the public radar that being green is kind of part of our lifestyle here.
Are there other places in the world, countries or regions, districts that are noted for their awareness and action on green issues?
Certainly Europe. Holland comes to mind as being a very green country in terms of some of its policies and some of its environmental protection measures. It's one of the most densely populated countries in the world, but yet it still has a lot of green space and a lot of agricultural space. And it has to deal with floods and, you know, rising sea levels. So it's got a vested interest in dealing with these things, because
yes,
it would cease to exist as a country if it didn't.
They're very motivated.
Yeah.
Vanessa, Metro Vancouver seems to be a leader in this in the province also. Have you been a part of efforts within the organization to move it in environmental learning directions?
Definitely. We've partnered up with SFU and also the Experiential Learning, Environmental Learning and Experience Framework document, as well as a new partnership with BC Provincial Parks and Parks Canada on the Get Outdoors document. And that's a tool to help teachers get outdoors in a more comfortable setting and making them, giving them tools to help them out so that they're not dependent on park interpreters. But definitely involved in a lot of key areas in education, but as well as we have a regional parks and greenway plan, which is a subsidiary of our sustainability framework of Metro Vancouver. And so we are trying very hard to walk the talk and hopefully help improve the climate and green up our space in Vancouver here.
That's very encouraging, because Metro Vancouver is steward for some magnificent terrain, and the possibility of what can be done with it to convert it into a learning environment for this direct experience is really without limit. There's a cultural dimension to everything we do in British Columbia too, and we wanted to talk about the multicultural dimensions of this topic, how different cultures come to it, where they strengthen it, where they bring new perspectives, and where there even may be some resistance. In your work, David, how do you deal with the multicultural aspect of environmental learning?
Well, one of the things that the Environmental Learning and Experience document talks about is multiple perspectives on environment. For example, in Vancouver we have a large Asian population, we have a large Indian population, we have immigrants from Europe, and we have sort of people that were born here, and also First Nations perspectives. Now, all of those perspectives culturally have different distinct ideas about what constitutes environment. And what constitutes interaction in the environment. So it's not a simple thing when you're dealing with a group of people that are from all these different places in the world, and you're talking about how to value environment. You have to kind of look at that in a very complex way. One of the things we like to do in our programs is to go to places like the Sen Yat-sen Gardens, for example, and look at, oh, okay, well, now how's this park different than another park, and why do you think it's different than that park, and you know, what's connected to that particular cultural view of the environment. All of those things can inform our work, I think.
Vanessa, when you take groups out, do you get a sense of sometimes different cultural groups coming at the environment from different directions, and if so, could you specify some of what those conversations are like?
Definitely. You know, some folks will view it as a pure recreational space and that it's theirs to manage and theirs to do as they wish. And then there are other groups who are totally afraid of the environment because of where they're from. They have a lot of venomous creatures, and so you don't touch anything because you might die. And so education is a big part of what we do, is to get them feeling safe, first of all, and comfortable with their environment, and then getting them engaged with it.
I had that experience. I used to be an international student advisor, and I remember taking a group of students from Kenya for a walk in our beautiful Ohio woods, and I noticed they were getting very ill at ease, and finally they told me where I'm from, where we're from, snakes could drop out of these trees and, you know, on us, and I said, well, you're in Ohio now, and there isn't any of that problem. Now, from a point of view of a parent who believes in this and wants to do the best by their children, let's talk about how parents can enrich the experience of their children so that they can get a full depth of feeling and understanding about the environment. I know that that's your job, for example, Vanessa, and David, you train the people who do that work, and you're also a parent. So could you talk a little bit about what parents can do to make the best possible early experience for their children with respect to the environment?
Well, I think one is they can do research. In the internet age, there's just a huge wealth of information on the web. I know Metro Vancouver has an extensive website. The Sierra Youth Clubs and nature clubs, there's information about all the parks, for example, on the web. There's a lot you can find out about ecosystems and biodiversity. So that's one way, is do the research and kind of learn and support your child in terms of learning about the local environment. But also getting out there and helping and volunteering in the school. For example, one of the biggest barriers to getting kids outside is often having enough parent volunteers to come along on the field trip, for example. So that's a very tangible way that you can kind of get in there and be helping other kids have these kinds of real-world experiences.
And Vanessa, any advice for parents?
Tons. First of all, there's the Young Naturalist Club, and what that does is it gets kids of the same age out into nature, and that's when they can kind of feed off each other. There's also the Children in Nature Network, and that's where they could do research on the internet to get support and more information. But also there's a lot of stewardship opportunities in our parks, so they can come out and help actually remove invasive species or help plant something to replace it. So that gets them involved in a good feeling kind of way.
Thank you, Vanessa and David. We'll be right back. One of the many functions of education that is missed in accountability and school ranking debates is the power of schools to reform the values and attitudes of society. Among these areas of imminent change is environmental learning. For us to achieve a sustainable lifestyle and economy, there is a need for accurate information, in-depth analysis, and insight into the morality of our relationship with the environment and the world community. The good news is all these goals make for powerful multidisciplinary curriculum that is timely and challenging. Furthermore, it is a curriculum geared to creating an engaged activist citizenry. Educators welcome this challenge. We understand what is at stake in the race for sustainability. Thank you for watching Your Education Matters.
For more information about this show or to view past episodes, go to the Your Education Matters website at www.youreducationmatters.ca. The views